Welcome to the Save What You Love podcast. I'm your host, Mark Titus. Today I sit down with Peter Gros. Peter spent his childhood watching hosts Marlon Perkins and Jim Fowler navigate the wild wonders of the world on Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. I'm of a certain age, but I'm sure many of you out there remember sitting on Sunday nights on the couch like I did watching Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. And wow, what a cool continuum to get to talk to Peter. Today, Peter Gros hosts Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, Protecting the Wild. Growing up in New York's Hudson Valley, Peter was surrounded by a large variety of North American wildlife, and then Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom motivated him to further his education in wildlife care and pursue a career in wildlife conservation education. His expertise led to designing innovative wildlife displays where animals roamed free on small islands while people viewed them from rafts offshore. He then became a spokesman for the natural world while developing endangered species breeding programs, which landed him an appearance on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson in 1984. It was in Carson's studio where Gros met one of his lifetime childhood idols, Jim Fowler. He was a former host of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom and was presented with a chance of a lifetime. Marlon Perkins was stepping down from his hosting duties at the time, and the show needed a new co-host. Gros literally leapt at the opportunity. In 1985, Peter officially joined as co-host of Wild Kingdom. Throughout his 38-year career, Gros has seen real change, like bald eagles and alligators coming off the endangered species list. And he says, although we have more work to do, there could never be a more rewarding career for me. Right now, Peter Gros is hosting Wild Kingdom Protecting the Wild on Saturday mornings on NBC. In this episode, we discuss inspiration to devote a life to conservation work, bringing endangered species back from the brink, utilizing a large platform to get people to care, engaging kids in nature early and often, the biggest threats to wildlife today, and adaptation in a changing climate. Peter's a gentleman and a scholar, and I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did having the conversation with him. Onward.
How do you say what you love when the world is burning down? How do you say what you love when pushes come to shove? How do you say what you love when things are upside down? How do you say what you love? Times are getting tough.
Peter, welcome to the show. Where are you joining us from today?
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I'm not that far from you, actually. I'm up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Beautiful, beautiful place. And I'm so glad you could join us today. I, like so many others, have been a disciple of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. I remember sitting on our crappy orange fabric couch, my brother and I kind of huddled up together watching Marlon Perkins, and it was like the delight of our week was watching the show. And now you get to carry on that legacy. I'd love for you to just start and tell us your story. Where'd you grow up? How did you get into this line of work?
Well, not unlike you, I started my my Sunday afternoons watching Marlon Perkins and Jim Fowler as well, which sort of set the hook for me. I was raised in the Hudson Valley, surrounded by forests and a pond in the backyard, and an area that had been forested by my grandfather, and that was sort of my childhood playground. So I was sort of rewired to spend time in the natural world. After that, I went to school for animal husbandry and behavior, and then started work eventually designing free-roaming displays, and was fortunate enough to have a large litter of tigers born that happened to be the largest ever.
Wow.
And the mother whom I had raised let me in the den box to rotate the youngsters, the cubs, so they could then get the necessary colostrum, which they needed
Mm.
within the first 24 hours. As a result of that, someone took a picture in those days. It went on the wire. Remember that?
The Wire,
and
yes.
yeah, and I was contacted if I would bring it on bring the Cubs on a national show and talk about tigers. And I agreed if, in fact, we could talk about the plight of spotted and striped endangered cats and
Mm.
specific tigers. And I did. And who was there but Jim Fowler from
Wow.
Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom.
Wow.
So it went well and we had a great talk and we were familiar with each other's careers. And he said, Mr. Perkins at the time was not well and thinking about retiring, and they were looking for someone to work with Jim Fowler, who didn't want an actor. They wanted someone in the conservation field. And
Mhm.
I thought for about 3 seconds and said yes. So you might say that that was sort of the beginning, and that was in 1985.
Wow. Wow. Did you always have a bent toward conservation, or, was there which came first? The love of the animal, just the critter itself, or did you have some sense of, man, we need to protect these guys out there? Which, or did it kind of happen at the same time?
I had an appreciation of wilderness at a very young age and enjoyed the time I spent in nature. And growing up in the Hudson Valley, I also had an interest in sailing. And at the time, I remember reading about the Hudson River not really being a safe enough place to swim in.
Mm.
And there was a movement to clean up effluent from factories and plants into the river. And over a period of time, it was getting better and better. And I became interested in stream and river cleanups. And then as I began more interested to find out challenged wildlife around the world and wanted to know what I could do more internationally. Along came this tremendous opportunity
Right.
with Mutual of Omaha, which gives me a platform to be able to talk about progress about wildlife around the world and wildlife and wildlands that were being challenged. So that sort of really inspired me to learn more and more and more, read as much as I possibly could, and then fortunately be able to travel with Jim Fowler, working with biologists and scientists and experts, and come back to the US and share that knowledge we had learned about international conservation.
It's a similar story for me. I grew up fishing here in Puget Sound. Salmon were always a huge part of my life. Grew up fishing with my dad, became a guide in Alaska for a dozen years, and worked in the salmon industry in Bristol Bay, and didn't really know how it would come full circle, but when it sort of did, and this idea for creating my first feature documentary, The Breach, came into my consciousness. Like you, I had this glimmer of an idea that, hey, maybe this could go further. Maybe the work itself could be work toward conservation, and that's in fact what's happened over time. I'm curious, how did your activism or your work in conservation augment or change at all, if it did indeed change, once you started working at Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom?
Well, like you, who is in the business of storytelling through film, you become aware very quickly how impactful you can be affecting public attitude. The old expression about a picture being worth 1,000 years, I'm familiar with the kind of things that you've done, and think of all the people who have seen your work as a result of that, say, what can I do to help?
Right, that's it.
Well, I feel the same way. I think that literally hundreds of thousands of people our show that runs on NBC on Saturday mornings,
Mhm.
Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom Protecting the Wild, gives us that platform and an opportunity to educate and affect people's attitude and sort of connect the next generation with conservation. One of the recent shows was right there, Puget Sound, that
Mm,
you're probably familiar with, called Pause.
sure,
And
absolutely.
they take in injured wildlife, one of which was an eagle that had been shot, if you can imagine that, and needed surgery and over a long, extensive period of time of recovery. It got strong enough to be able to fly in its flight cage.
Hmm.
We were there when we took it down to a park near Puget Sound where, as you described, so the salmon are running. It's sort
Yeah.
of eagle paradise there.
Yeah.
And we opened the door and released it, and it flew up into a tree nearby, and with Puget Sound in the background and the forest behind it, and sat up there, and it was strong and healthy, and it was a wonderful show to be able to do. So appreciate where you live and the kind
Oh,
of
thank you.
wildlife you have there. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for the Pacific Northwest.
Same, obviously, and Alaska. And I'm thinking maybe you were on the Skagit River, yeah, for the Eagles.
Yes, you're right. I believe it was. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I know.
I know it. I know it well. It's
Yeah.
I think it's considered one of my home rivers, that and the Snoqualmie, and it's where I get my solace after, putting in the hours. And speaking of, I know that you are one of the faces of protecting the wild. And as a show, how much input do you have on the content of each episode? Are you summarily the host of the show, or do you turn your creative juices up and contribute to the each of the episodes as they're being built?
Well, we all contribute.
Good.
Hearst Media Group, Dr. Ray Wynn Grant, myself, Mutual of Omaha, we all contribute into the development of the stories that need to be told. As you probably noticed, the first year was about positive, successful conservation stories.
Yep.
The original Wild Kingdom, and it's interesting to think back, Mutual of Omaha has been involved with this show. This is our 60th year, for a
It's
little over
incredible.
60 years. So to be able to continue that legacy, to me is an honor.
Yeah.
To be able to contribute with my knowledge of reproduction of endangered species and animal behaviorism, and the knowledge that I've learned traveling around the world is just a thrill. So yes, there is a lot of data accumulated. Of course, we deal with the local biologists and researchers and scientists with whom we'll be telling the story, and that all is incorporated into each story. The nice thing about the shows that we started with is that I remember as a teenager watching a show about the bald eagle and how the use
Mm,
of DDT affected the thickness of the eggs and how they became part of the endangered species list.
right.
And the black-footed ferret, which was actually thought to actually be extinct. And then the problem with beavers. And then the numbers of animals that were on the endangered species list, even the first year I joined the show, the alligator in Florida
Right.
was threatened, and it came off the endangered species list. I had the good fortune to be able to talk about wildlife that Marlon Perkins and Jim Fowler talked about on Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom that were highly threatened and endangered, to talk about some of these species now that, due to conservation projects and successes, are coming off the endangered species list.
Wow.
So it's an incredible thrill for me just to be a part of that.
Yeah, that's just such good work. And I'm curious to dig in a little bit more. I'm personally curious about the regenerative work of these species, and that's kind of where your roots were, right? In husbandry. And how much hands-on are you involved with, and how much can you tell us about uh, recreation or species breeding that enhances some of these species that are endangered?
Well, probably the black-footed ferret that in the 80s was thought to be extinct, was rediscovered in Meeteetse, Wyoming, near Yellowstone,
Mm,
and on a private ranch. And then the Department of Interior, Fish and Wildlife Service, and private landowners and zoos around the United States all worked together as a team to figure out how to make the decision of what to do with these few remaining black-footed ferrets. So it was decided that they would be collected and placed at numerous zoos. So if disease was an issue, the remaining ferrets wouldn't disappear. The gene pool was sort of spread around. Um, Eventually, they were reproducing well enough to be taken back to this hog ranch in Meeteetse, Wyoming, and turned loose again near a prairie dog town, which is about 85% of their diet. Um,
Mm,
we were there to be able to release a species that was thought to be extinct, and to see them back out on the prairie, going down the holes, moving into the prairie dog town again was such a thrill. Not unlike the story that we've told about the California condor. There
right.
were literally 22 birds remaining when that same decision had to be made um, to collect them and move them into breeding situations. And
Mm.
places like the San Diego Zoo and the Los Angeles Zoo and the Oregon Zoo, um, and many more, were able to breed them in incubators. And then I'm sure you're familiar with the famous feeding of them with puppets that look
That's right.
like
Of
their
course.
parents.
Of course.
Anybody
Yes.
who's familiar with the program realizes that they were raised thinking that those puppets were their parents feeding them.
Wow.
And so they didn't become imprinted on people. Um, Now there are over 500 condors again.
Wow.
Again, we went to one of the locations where they are released back to the wild. Um, I remember going to Zion National Park, if I can back up a little, and
Yeah, for
hiking
sure.
7 hours up to a peak called Angel's Landing to look out over a valley where one might possibly see one of the few remaining condors years ago.
Hmm.
Now the final med check was being taken on this condor that I was holding in my arms, and it was looking up at me with this huge beak, and it passed perfectly and was ready to be released. And I took it over to the edge of a hill and faced it into the wind and just opened my arms and watched this 9 foot wingspan as this amazing condor locked his wings, and the heat thermals were coming up, and off it went back over to the land where it used to live. It was those are the kind of memories that just stay with you forever.
That's incredible. You,
Yeah.
you're kind of leading into the thought process I was having as you were wrapping that story up. Uh, there's a lot more known about the symbiotic nature of nature now. And I mean, trees and mycelial network, for one thing, um, the sentience of different animals. And you come from a background of working with animals. You've got a scientific sensibility and a discipline for sure. But are there any moments where you feel these attachments to these critters, and or is there that kind of, by definition and by the virtue of your work, that detachment that you have necessary to do the objective work? Or do you find yourself getting kind of attached to these guys, the ferrets, the condors, the animals that you might feel a heart sense for, especially ones that are endangered?
That's a great question. And when we're talking to biologists who've spent 5, 6, sometimes 10 years of their lives working with these very endangered animals, getting them to a point where their offspring can be released back to the wild, I ask that very same question. I see
Mm,
it must be bittersweet.
yeah.
You you've nursed this animal to a point where it's ready to go back to the wild again. And the most consistent answer seems to be, of course, we love to see them back in the wild. But you do build a bond. You do realize that they have different personalities. You get to know them so well that it's hard to see them go again back out where they belong, but there's nothing more rewarding than see an animal back where it belongs, out flying or running free again. I know one of the, again, back at Paws, there were a couple of bears that were caught in that devastating fires in the Pacific Northwest a number of years ago.
Mm.
And they were there for treatment for a year and were treated with no human contact. And the burns on their paws were treated and they healed again. And the skin had sloughed off and all new skin grew back. And they even hibernated there again with no human contact because whenever they were treated, they were asleep, tranquilized, and then the people who worked with them so extensively there at Paws had to see the care of these young bear cubs that grew and grew as they went back up into the Cascade Mountains and were released back to the wild.
Mm.
And you could see a tear here and there.
Yeah.
It was again, it was tough, but they were so pleased to see them back again. And they do have tracking devices, and they were at last check acting like normal wild bears back in the forest again.
Wow. Look, I think there's a danger in anthropomorphizing animals, potentially, but I also see I'm going to choose to look at an optimistic way of thinking in those folks. You are one of them on the ground who are doing this great work. And what you're able to do, especially in your work as somebody in the media who has a big, broad platform, I think ultimately, if we can get other folks to care, we got a good shot at creating popular sentiment to contribute the financial resources necessary, contribute different attitudes in a societal way about how we treat nature and that we are a part of nature and it is a part of us, as opposed to it's just something out there for our taking and for our resource extraction and for our finite needs, which has been the case, frankly, for last couple hundred years, really primarily. Do do you get a sense that maybe consciousness is shifting in a direction that's lending us toward a more sympathetic, more compassionate, more empathetic viewpoint toward inclusiveness in nature, our own and nature in with us? And second part to that question is, do you see that changing in kids and young people in particular?
I do. I see positive changes. I think that because of the internet and so much more interested, there's so much more interest in what's happening in the natural world. I see one of the fastest growing hobbies, if you will, are young people becoming involved in hiking, backpacking, kayaking, canoeing, spending time in the great outdoors. And one of the things that I like to champion is as early as you can expose your friends and your young family and your children to the outdoors, even before they're have motor control to be able to walk. They have wonderful little backpacks now. They can be riding on your back and to do day hikes and then eventually grow that into overnight camping at county and state and then eventually national parks. We in our country have some of the most magnificent national parks um, of many places I've ever been. It's incredible what we have to offer children in this country. Um, about so yes, I think that you're seeing more and more young people expressing more interest. The most common question I get after people see our shows on NBC on Saturday morning, if I'm someplace where I'm approached by young people, the question used to be, is it dangerous what you do? What's it
Mm.
diving with white sharks? What's it like in Siberia and Lake Baikal? Those kinds of questions. And now we learn so much about the science behind your show. What can we do to help? And
Wonderful.
it's such a transition to hear those kinds of questions from young people.
That well, two thoughts. One was you stole my thunder. You were that was
I'm
exactly
sorry.
what, not at all. You were not at all. We're on the same page. That's a good
Yeah,
thing. And
yeah,
I
then
was going
tell
to
me.
ask you about some of the more intrepid, and we'll get to that. But also the familiarity as well. Like the work in my adult life really came out of that same question. being up on stage after screening films, what can I do to help? And
Mhm.
all of the things, the salmon business that we have, we donate 10% of our profits back to the indigenous folks of Bristol Bay, where we source the salmon from, to give their kids four-year college scholarships and trade school scholarships. And ultimately, all of that has been to answer that one question: what can I do to help? We've tried to
Mhm.
create frictionless pathways to do that, and especially our focus in wild salmon.
Yeah.
Um, so, with that in mind, I mean, you get to do really cool things and you get to see really amazing things. And in order to do that, you have to step outside of your comfort zone from time to
Yes.
time, correct? So, given that backdrop, can you give us a few examples of some of the most intrepid, some of the most, I don't know, scary, the things that took you actually out of your
Mhm.
comfort zone, but then maybe gave you the greatest satisfaction afterwards?
Sure, sure. I think that I'm fortunate to be able to say being in the great outdoors is my comfort zone.
Nice.
It's the other aspects of the business which have become a learning curve that I'm very pleased to be able to do.
Right.
But certainly, we just finished a show about sharks off of
Mm.
Santa Barbara. Dr. Ray and I were able to go out with they were tracking great white sharks with drones, and a lot of the data shown from this drone filming is that our old um, our old perceptions of great white sharks have changed. We used to think about them as marauding great white sharks looking for anything in the ocean to consume.
Hmm.
In 1985, I remember going to a place appropriately called Dangerous Reef in Australia, where the white sharks would come in during pupping season.
Mm.
And it was one of my very first shows. And so when I was asked if I did you scuba dive before we went, the only real answer is of course I scuba dive. Um, Several weeks later, we were anchored out off of Dangerous Reef in this older shrimp boat with a shark cage on the side, and the sharks were swimming around the stern of the boat. And my job was to swim from the boat over to the shark cage, and we would film them. And the head diver was there, and he watched me as I was nervously glancing at the dorsal fins behind the boat and assembling my regulator to the back of my scuba tank. And he his big hand on my shoulder and said, "Mr. Gross, how long have you been diving?" And I said, "Well, I've been diving a while now. Just a few weeks ago, I was diving in California, and I had been. A friend put me in his swimming pool and taught me the buddy breeze and said,
Oh
"You'll do
boy.
fine. You're comfortable underwater."
Oh my God.
So he said, "Tell me the truth. You've just put that on backwards." And I did. And he said,
Oh.
"Stick close to me. You'll be just fine." So I learned there with this wonderful master diver who taught me a lot. And then that was a bit of the scary, it's your scary question. That was part of that, having
Oh man.
sharks come up to the cage. Now, most recently, when we filmed our show, we've learned that white sharks are just curious about people.
Mm.
It's so often by the drone footage, you'll see swimmers or paddleboarders or surfers or kayakers or people in the ocean, that many sharks around them just curiously watching to see what they're doing. We were instructed to paddle out off the coast about a quarter of a mile. The drone was hovering and they directed us by radio to paddle over to this 8 foot roughly white shark in our little 14-foot kayaks. And sure enough, the shark popped up right next to us and swam around several times and then circled around behind. And it sort of followed behind for a little bit and then was curious, rolled up. You could see its eye and it could
Mm.
see ours. And then off it went on its way. So
Wow.
we paddled back in. So what this research is showing, and all the data that's been accumulated, is that sharks are curious. Sharks are just really curious about what's going on in the ocean. They're actually very particular about what they're going to eat. So we're hoping to change attitudes about great white sharks, how important they are to the ocean. They're a keystone species, and we
Mm.
absolutely need white sharks.
Halftime. Did you know you could have the world's finest wild salmon shipped directly to your door? It's true. Our Ava's Wild Bristol Bay sockeye salmon is the lowest carbon footprint center plate protein on the planet, and it's packed with heart healthy omega 3 fatty acids. Don't take our word for it. Ask chefs like Seattle's Tom Douglas and Taichi Kitamura, who are serving our sashimi grade wild salmon in their award winning restaurants. You can have the exact same fillets we deliver to them shipped flash frozen to your door. What's more, Ava's Wild donates 10% of our profits to indigenous led efforts to protect Bristol Bay in perpetuity. That's the place we source the salmon from. Right now, that looks like supporting the Bristol Bay Foundation, granting Bristol Bay's indigenous young people scholarships to four-year colleges, universities, and trade schools. Visit avaswild.com to join our growing community doing good by eating right. That's save, spelled backwards, wild.com, and eat wild to save wild. Now, back to the show. I've seen a young woman on Instagram whose name is escaping me right now, so we'll put these in the show notes, dear listener. That has absolutely blown my mind about her close encounters with sharks, and
Mhm.
the blowing up these old perceptions of shark
Yeah,
behavior, and to your point about being, marauders and eating machines and
yeah,
man killers in air quotes, out in the ocean, and more about this deep level of curiosity as you're talking about
yes.
that. That's got to feel, whether it's a shark or a whale or a raptor or any of these amazing creatures that you work with, it's got to give you a real sense of awe and humility, perhaps. Does that ring true?
Oh, it absolutely it does. It's a sense of awe and it's reassurance that the more we learn through modern day technology, the better chance we're going to have of preserving wildlife. Um, there's a tremendous transition from how we would film with heavy film cameras and then transitioning to video and having to hide in a camouflaged tent next to a watering hole, waiting for animals to come in and drink, um, spending hours looking for wildlife in Africa. The manner in which they did the research in those days sometimes involved roping or netting because that's how scientists had to do it then.
Hmm.
And it was very hands on. Now, due to today's technology, when we film, we're filming with drones. We have heat sensing cameras that animals walk by, motion sensing cameras we put along trails so biologists can study them. Um, what you're seeing with our long lenses, we recently filmed the plight of wolves in this country, specifically red wolves.
Mm.
Um, and that's a wonderful show that we love to tell because there were so many misconceptions about wolves from the 40s on, the big bad wolves. It
Right.
goes way back to us being taught the wrong information about them. And now the present day show explains what wolves are really about and how we need them, what important part of the ecosystem they are. But back to my point about the modern day technology, these long lenses that we have now, we can reach out hundreds of yards and bring them up close as we film them. So what you're seeing more of now is natural wildlife behavior up close and personal. So we still have adventure. We still want people to see Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom protecting the wild. You're still dealing with X factors. They're still wild animals, but it's science based and it's interesting and there's always surprises, but you're going to see a lot more wildlife up close doing what it does naturally in the natural world.
Did you in fact work with film cameras?
I did indeed.
Oh
Yes, I
man.
remember being up in the 80s in Oh, you would remember up near in North Alaska, the most northerly point in Alaska, filming polar bears.
Wow.
And it was so cold that they actually had to degrease the cameras, take all the grease out because it turned into glue,
Oh
and
man.
run the cameras for short periods of time. This is a Point Barrow, Alaska.
Yeah.
At short periods of time, filming there. So yes, we did get to do that.
Eh,
And then we filmed in a warmer climate. We went to in Africa and we filmed on the Zambezi River, which is right on the border of Zambia and Zimbabwe. And we put in right under Victoria Falls.
mm,
And the cameras that we filmed the rafting down this class 5 water through what's called Valley of the Giants for very good reason. We wound up the cameras in waterproof cases, and the point of view was from ours in the raft, as well as from camera people along the shore. So I've been fortunate enough to see the transition from film to video to digital, and now with all these wonderful new manners in which we get to film.
Well, look, I have shot on film myself, and it is just a testament to technology, to where we are, to the democratization too of being able to tell stories. I mean, once upon a time, you had to have a huge, amazing philanthropic backer like Mutual of Omaha or
Mhm.
private money or a Hollywood studio system to be able to get into the game.
Yeah.
And, and you had to have a tremendous amount of skill and patience and luck, and technical savvy to be able to, be able to handle that equipment.
Mhm.
And, you know, holy smokes, you got to be judgmental about what you get because you don't have an infinite supply that you can just
Yes.
keep running and offloading like we do now with our digital onto, hard drives or whatever the source codes are.
Yeah.
It's just a totally different world, and it's got to be. I can't imagine being actually out in the field, like in an extreme climate of cold, like you were talking about at Point Barrow, or in hot and sand and wet.
Mhm.
That to me, knowing what the game is, that's a tremendous testament to your not only your savvy, but your grit to be able to get that done. So good
Well,
stuff.
it's 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 a great labor of love. I like you, I think we both know we have the best jobs in the world.
Totally.
It
Totally.
it's it's but even with today's technology, as I'm sure you know, there are X factors. Um, just reflecting on not that long ago, filming a story about the return of the otters near Monterey Bay,
Mm,
that they were disappearing, and the Monterey Bay Aquarium and other facilities have been taking orphaned otters and saving them. Well, we were there filming in a kelp forest, and the kelp forests are being threatened because of sea urchins, because the stars that used to keep them in check have dwindled to a surge in the hotter section of ocean temperatures, so they've lost their major predator.
mm.
Sea otters still like to eat sea urchins. That's a good thing. So there's this very intimate connection of wildlife together, all keeping each other in balance. We were there diving with our digital gear and had a wonderful photographer with us. And we went into the kelp bed, and the visibility is about 5 feet.
Wow.
So
Wow.
we're ready to film the kelp beds and the otters. And fortunately, a harbor seal, noticing the yellow trim on my fins, came out and decided to play with that. So we have some great surges of kelp beds, and not that far away, our otters are laying on their backs, basking, uh, holding on to the kelp with one fin, while this wonderful little creature is playing with my fin, and they were able to capture that on film. I mean, what we do is relatively easy. Being able to capture the people behind the camera and this, they're the true artists, I tell you.
You
So
are
we
so
came away
right.
with that. And then just north of there is a slough called Corkscrew Slough, where the otters have been reintroduced, and they're doing so well that they're actually back up to carrying capacity there.
Wow.
So again, a species that was almost disappearing, now this slough has so many otters, it's doing well and thriving and reproducing in the wild again. hopefully you'll see them go farther and farther and see more of them up along the Pacific coast.
That's just great news all the way around. That you just touched on this in talking about the otters, and I know that there are many answers to this question based on the species we're talking about. But coming from it from 100,000 foot view, what do you consider right now to be the biggest threat to wildlife today? And has your opinion changed throughout your time working in animal conservation on what that threat or those threats could be?
Well, I think the biggest threat to wildlife is the habitat which they need to survive.
Hmm.
I think we're doing better. I think back to places like Costa Rica, where 35% of their land has been set aside for wildlife, and a result, this wonderful business has evolved called ecotourism. The
Right.
incentive there is people come and take pictures. It creates an economic base, which creates a reason for to save this natural habitat where wildlife needs to exist. Um, we recently did a show in Florida about the corridor connecting wildlife from the southern tip of Florida all the way to the northern end. By creating this corridor of ranchers and private landowners all agreeing this to connect this 18 million acre corridor. So animals like bears and the Florida panther, who all need to migrate to find mates and for other reasons, will all be interconnected again. About 12 million acres now is already completed. And this is again is one of the shows that you'll see on Protect Wild Kingdom, Protecting the Wild on Saturday mornings on NBC, is how this corridor is connecting wildlife as it should be. Also, the Highway Department in Florida is creating underpasses for wildlife to be able to cross under these busy Florida freeways. Car strikes has been a problem, and now there's the solution is more and more underpasses. In other states like California, overpasses are going in. Wildlife crossings are not new. We're starting to see them more and more, and the habitat stop being contiguous because of the freeway system and the growth.
Mhm.
The goal now is we connect their habitats again the way it used to be. So I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic. I see more and more people wanting to participate. I see ranch owners and landowners saying being taking pride in the fact that they have such large sections of land that wildlife can share with them. That I'm very optimistic.
We have a super successful wildlife passage overpass on I-90 going across Snoqualmie Pass here in Washington. Next time, if you drive west here, you might notice it. And they've got several underpasses that are connecting as well, and they've got a new final stage. It'll be another large scale overpass further east of where the current one is. And it is just so exciting to see the success that it is already rendered from, martins and minks and elk and bear and foxes and coyotes. I mean, the whole thing is just working. And I agree with you. I'm optimistic too. When you get to see these large scale projects receive some success
Mhm.
and get young people behind it and frankly politicians and folks that have the kind of capital to continue funding these things, it does really put some wind in your sails about what we are capable of doing as a species. It's great.
It is great and it's exciting and you being a part of all this, you feel the same kind of excitement and energy that I get. Um, you've worked with a nature conservancy.
That's right.
We recently completed a show about the return of the Channel Island fox to the Channel Islands, just 17 miles off the coast of Northern California, um,
Amazing.
directly out from Santa Barbara, actually. Years ago, it was used for ranching. The ranch became unsuccessful and the ranch stopped, but there were still feral pigs and other introduced species. And because of that, golden eagles were attracted.
Mm.
Golden eagles not only ate other wildlife, but they also went after the island fox. Island foxes didn't understand predators. They didn't even try to evade them. And the other foraging animals had eaten away a lot of the cover, so they had no cover. The Nature Conservancy became involved, purchased a large portion of the island. It's become a national park. You can actually go out in sections of the island and camp now and learn how they've saved this archipelago. The story now, we camped there in tents, and the golden eagles were relocated. Bald eagles, which were originally on the island, have been replaced. They're there now. Bald eagles eat fish, not foxes. The foxes are thriving, their numbers are doing well. Um, Santa Barbara Zoo and other zoos were involved in setting up breeding facilities on the island rather than on the mainland. So they had no immune system that could handle diseases that might originate from from mainland foxes. So they were raised there on the island in these large introductory pens, released back to the wild. And when we were filming there, um, those pens were overgrown with grass, not even necessary to be used anymore. And on some of the islands, they're thriving.
Wow.
When you camp, the foxes will actually come up and be near you at night, kind of curious about what's going on. So another successful reintroduction story, and how people have changed their habits about how they're using natural wild lands.
Peter, I'm curious, have you had the opportunity to work with indigenous stewards of the lands and or observe the work that's been done by, First Nations and Native American folks? There seems to be a resurgence in uh, looking at things through a lens that the people that were here before colonization looked at the world, and they had a pretty damn good success rate at keeping things in a really sustainable way. Have in your professional life, have you had any chance to intersect with indigenous folks in the way that they do things?
Yes, I have. And we've learned an awful lot from the way they do things and have done things for generations. With the bowhead whales that are migrating and coming up around Point Barrow, we were part of the census with them as well. I attended a Indigenous Peoples Conference, and there was discussion. They have their own wildlife management group, and we talked about reintroduction of bison. And now they have very successful bison programs where they exchange animals, so they don't have animals in the herd that are related. I have in many countries, and I always look forward to it. I think one of the joys of my job is I've worked with different cultures from South America to Siberia to all over the United States to China. And I worked with so many different cultures of people, and and even taking young kids, 70-year-old children, 7-year-old, seventh grade children with me to the Peruvian rainforest with a cross-cultural exchange with the Yagua people there in the Rivianos tribe. And the conclusion I've come to is we're all pretty much the same wherever we go in the world.
Mm,
Um, we all have the same needs. We have similar interests. We want happy families. We want shelter. We want roof. We want food. But we're all so similar that when we spend time working together, um, the golden rule, it's just that simple. You treat
yeah.
people the way you want to be treated. And it's such a wonderful opportunity to be able to travel and deal with as many different cultures as I have.
Wow. What what a great career you've had, and I agree with what exactly everything you just said. When you have an opportunity to, well, for one thing, put these devices down and get back away from behind a screen and
Mhm.
get into the world and engage with nature and engage with other people that may look at things differently based on their life experience, based on their history, based on their geography. But ultimately, you're right. We are all pretty much the same. We're made of the same stuff, and
Mhm.
we want our kids to thrive, and we want to have our basic needs met. But but ultimately, I think that there's a lot of love and a lot of laughter and a lot of care for this planet and these animals. I'm looking over here because my dog's looking at me with eyes from the couch. These critters that we love, that we can do better than we've done, and there's room for all of us. And with that, I wanted to ask you, you had a quote a while back, and you said, before Wild Kingdom, there was an attitude that we had plenty of wildlife and they would last forever. But the show made us all very aware that our planet had problems and we needed to preserve the natural world for both animals and our own quality of life.
Mhm.
Okay, so that was your quote. There are still folks who don't feel we have any problems with the way we are operating as a species. We've really been talking about this and around this whole conversation, but how, to really put a fine point on it, from your perspective and with the wealth of experience and depth of knowledge you have, how do we get folks to care?
I think we need to introduce folks to the natural world, as I mentioned earlier, as early as possible. Um, Research has shown that not only physically, but mentally, it's healthy for us to have a balance in life, spending time in nature. Um, I think that what Mutual of Omaha has done for years is expose people through the lens and on their shows more and more of our natural world to see how incredible it is. The attitude about there are fewer animals in many cases. We do need to make that point. I think our goal is to affect the next generation and be sure that they're aware that they can make a difference, be it one person, a group of people, be it a corporation. You can make a difference. The message is with a platform like we have to be able to talk to people about what they can do to help. Um, Enough has been said, I think, in recent history about the the status of our planet. I call it the gloom and doom message.
Yeah.
There has been a lot of gloom and doom. People are very clear about it. And sometimes when I speak at universities, I'll ask for a show of hands. And some people actually think it's too late.
Hmm.
It's absolutely not too late. If you look back at what we grew up with polluted rivers and DDT and the serious problems that we had that seemed insurmountable, we have problems now that the next generation looks at. They're thinking about climate change and issues that may seem insurmountable to the end. We as humans need to save the natural world. We need to have time in nature. We need, and we're instinctively know that we need to be able to do that. I think the more we can teach people about what they can do to preserve the natural world, the more they're going to want to become involved. You feel good when you're doing the right thing. The right thing is to preserve this incredible natural world that we have. And people like you and like Mutual of Omaha and wildlife shows continue to share the knowledge we have about the state of the natural world. Sure, we have problems. Yes, there's gloom and doom, but also we need to create hope. We need to talk about the number of, excuse me, the numbers of problems we had in the past that we solve now. I remember the fastest bird in the world growing up, the peregrine falcon, was
Hmm.
disappearing.
Hmm.
Now they're in office buildings around Seattle, they're all around our country. They were reintroduced safely. We were talking about the bald eagle. Bald eagle came off the endangered species list. The wolf did. The grizzly bears are doing well. The black bears are doing well. There's a long list, which I don't know why we tend not to hear. Maybe good news doesn't quite sell as well as bad news. I don't really know why, but we need to be able to spend more time talking about solutions of, of for nature and the natural world in the past and solutions that are going to come in the future as long as we all become a part of it.
Peter, I couldn't agree with you more. And your optimism is a joy. The name of this show is Save What You Love. It's not We're Screwed, for a very particular reason. I think love is the more powerful emotion, the more enduring emotion. And you're right, it doesn't sell as much, divisive news headlines, but it is the one that endures. And frankly, that's where I'm gonna park it and put my money on the future as well. So Uh, Peter Gros, I so appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and be on the show. And you don't get off the hook though without doing the bonus round, which is our fun little way of ending things up every week or every show. And it's a little imagination game. Let's just say, God forbid, because these things are happening now more frequently, but there was a wildfire that was going to take out your home, and you got all the loved ones out and the critters, of course. But if you could only take one physical thing, what would be that one thing you would save?
A suitcase full of all the pictures.
Of course, it's a life in pictures. And also, if there was one thing on a more metaphysical level, it's one trait about you that makes Peter Peter, what would that one thing be?
Concern for our natural world and the people that occupy it.
Very good. You are a pro, sir. Well, listen, Peter, we know that we can watch Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom Protecting the Wild on Saturdays on NBC. Are there any other places that you want to direct folks to check out your work or the great conservation work that you admire others are doing right now?
Go, I would go to wildkingdom.com, and then there are many avenues that will direct you to learn more about what we're doing.
Thank you, man. That is wonderful. Well, Peter Gros, thank you for being on Save What You Love, and appreciate you, and I appreciate the great work you're doing in the world. And until next time, we'll see you down the trail.
Thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
You too.
How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love? How do you say what you love?
Thank you for listening to Save What You Love. If you like what you're hearing, you can help keep these conversations coming your way by giving us a rating on whatever platform you're listening from and leaving a comment on Apple Podcasts. It really helps get the word out. Check out photos on our Instagram feed. We're at Save What You Love Podcast, and you can get links from today's featured guest in the show notes of this episode. Join our growing community by subscribing to our newsletter at avaswild.com and then clicking on Connect in the upper corner. You'll get exclusive offers on wild salmon shipped to your door and notifications about upcoming guests and more great content on the way. That's at avaswild.com. The word save, spelled backwards, wild.com. This episode was produced by Emily Fern and edited by Patrick Troll. Original music was created by Whiskey Class. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you all down the trail.